Please like, share, and subscribe. Wishing you happiness and good luck every day.
All right, let's talk about a book that absolutely changed the game for business thinking. Good to Great by Jim Collins. You've probably heard of it, right? Well, today we're going to really dig into the core of it. This massive 5-year research project that set out to figure out how a handful of companies went from being just fine to becoming legendary. And it all kicks off with this one. Simple but kind of profound idea. Good is the enemy of great. Think about that for a second. It's that very comfort of being good enough that actually stops most companies, and hey, maybe most of us too, from ever reaching for something more. It's a fantastic paradox, and it's the foundation for everything we're about to explore. So that really is the central mystery, isn't it? It's the exact question Jim Collins and his team were obsessed with answering. Is being just good some kind of terminal illness for a company? Or is there a secret recipe, a blueprint for making that leap? Well, that's exactly what we're going to try and figure out. And to get to the bottom of it, the team went on this, truly epic research quest. We're talking about a 5-year deep dive. They literally waded through decades of financial data for almost 1,500 companies, all to find this tiny, super rare group of businesses that actually pulled it off. And this chart, this just shows it so perfectly. They found 11 companies, and for years, these companies were, just average, totally unremarkable, just chugging along with the rest of the market. But then, boom, something happened. They hit this distinct transition point and just skyrocketed, leaving all of their competitors completely in the dust for over 15 years. And just look at the numbers here. This wasn't some minor improvement. This was a whole different league. Get this, $1 invested in these companies turned into $471. That's insane. It didn't just beat the general market, it absolutely demolished it. We're talking results that even made superstars like GE and Intel look slow. So, of course, the billion-dollar question is, why? What happened? The research team used this great analogy of a black box. You see these, average companies go in one side, and then these incredible, great companies come out the other. The entire project was about cracking open that black box to see what was actually going on inside. Okay, now we're getting to one of the most surprising parts of the whole study. The team found that a lot of the things we all think lead to greatness, well, they just didn't matter. It was like that old Sherlock Holmes story. The important clue was the dog that didn't bark. The real discoveries were about what was missing. So, get ready for this. All that stuff we hear about, totally wrong. Bringing in some larger-than-life celebrity CEO from the outside, actually, that was a bad sign. Spending tons of money on complex, long-range strategy sessions didn't make a difference. Thinking that technology was the magic bullet that caused the change? Nope. Giant, headline-grabbing mergers? Not the key. Basically, almost everything you'd read in a typical business magazine was completely off base. So, if it wasn't any of that stuff, then what was it? Well, the very first and maybe the most important piece of the puzzle they found had to do with the person at the top. But it was a kind of leader nobody really expected. So the team came up with this framework, this 5-level pyramid of leadership. And here's the bombshell. Every single one, 100% of the companies that made the leap from good to great had what they called a level 5 leader at the helm when that transformation happened. Every single one. And this is where it gets really fascinating. A level 5 leader is not your typical charismatic, on the cover of a magazine CEO. Not at all. Instead, they're this really weird but incredibly powerful combination of two things that you wouldn't think go together: profound personal humility and just this fierce, unstoppable professional will. Let's unpack that a little. So on one side, you have personal humility. These leaders are modest, they're quiet, they're understated. Their ambition isn't for themselves, it's for the company. When things go well, they look out the window to give credit to others. But on the other side, you have this relentless professional will. They are absolutely fanatical about producing the best results. They'll do whatever it takes, no matter how hard, to make the company great. And the perfect example of this is a guy named Darwin Smith at Kimberly-Clark. Look at these two charts. They tell you everything you need to know. Before Darwin Smith took over, Kimberly-Clark was just a boring, middle-of-the-road paper company. Smith himself was this quiet, unassuming company lawyer who, get this, was diagnosed with terminal cancer right after becoming CEO. And what did he do? He made one of the boldest moves in corporate history. He decided to sell the paper mills, their entire core business, and go head-to-head with giants like Procter & Gamble in the consumer goods space. The press thought he was insane, but that professional will, it was unstoppable. And the result? Well, you can see it right there. A total transformation that just left the market in the dust. And this quote from Smith himself, it just says it all, doesn't it? After everything he accomplished, he said, "I never stopped trying to become qualified for the job." Wow, that right there is the essence of level 5 humility. Zero ego. It was all about the work, all about the company. Okay, so we have this level 5 leader, but how do they actually make this massive change happen? It's not like they just flip a switch one day. The way Collins explains it is through this absolutely brilliant metaphor. He calls it the flywheel effect. Just imagine a giant, heavy metal flywheel, like the size of a car. Your job is to get it spinning. That first push, it takes every ounce of your strength and it barely moves an inch. But you don't stop. You push again and again. For a long time, it feels like you're getting nowhere. But then slowly, you get one full turn, then 2, then 10, and suddenly you feel a change. The momentum starts to build. And pretty soon, the flywheel's own weight is helping you, spinning faster and faster until it's unstoppable. And that is the secret to the whole transformation. To everyone on the outside looking at the stock chart, it looks like this sudden, dramatic revolution, an overnight success. But for the people inside the company, it didn't feel like that at all. It felt like a slow, deliberate, organic process. There was no single big program, no one miracle moment. It was just the massive, cumulative effect of all those small, disciplined pushes, all in the same direction, day after day. Which brings us right back to where we started. What all this research proves is that greatness isn't really about your circumstances. It's not about luck. It's about conscious choice and relentless discipline. And that leaves us all with a pretty challenging question to think about, doesn't it? In our own work, in our own lives, where is being good enough getting in the way of us becoming truly great?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open a business classic that tackles a question that's probably bugged a lot of us. Why do so many companies get stuck just being, well, good? Good to Great isn't just a book, it's the answer that came out of a massive 5-year investigation.
So this is the book, and it asks a really simple question on the surface. Why do some companies manage to make that incredible leap from being just good to being truly great, while so many others just stay stuck in the middle? That single puzzle launched one of the most intense business studies you'll ever hear about. All right, let's get right into the heart of it. The whole foundation of this study is, well, it's an idea that might seem a little backwards at first.
So here's the big question, right? The one that got author Jim Collins and his whole team started. Now, it's not about turning a failing company around. Nope, it's about something way, way harder. Taking a company that's already good and making it legendary. So what's the deal? What's holding them back?
And the answer? Well, it's staring you right in the face. It's because good is the enemy of great. Think about it. When you're good enough, you get comfortable, right? You're paying the bills, things are fine. And that comfort, that is the very thing that kills the discipline and the drive to become truly great.
So you might be wondering, how in the world did they figure all this out? Well, this was not some weekend project. The scale of this investigation was just massive. We're talking 5 solid years of work. And they weren't just skimming headlines. They dug through 6,000 articles, generated over 2,000 pages of interview transcripts, and crunched decades of financial data. All of that just to find those secret ingredients, those hidden patterns that separate the great from the good.
And, this wasn't just Jim Collins locked in a room by himself. He had a whole crew, a dedicated team of researchers who were just as obsessed with finding the answer. They were the ones grinding away day in and day out to uncover these truths.
Okay, so just how valuable were these findings? I mean, really. To get a sense of that, let's talk about a wild question Jim Collins asked himself right before the book went to print. Seriously, put yourself in his shoes for a second. You've just poured 5 years of your life into this one thing, and then you ask yourself, how much money would it take for me to just throw it all away, to never tell a soul what I found?
He actually played this out in his head. He thought, okay, what about $1 million, 10 million? He kept pushing the number higher and higher until he landed on this insane figure, $100 million. Can you imagine? A briefcase with $100 million in it just to keep your mouth shut. Would you take it?
And here's the kicker. He realized, no, even for $100 million, he couldn't do it. There was no way he could take that money and just bury these ideas. What they had discovered was just too important to hide.
And that really tells you everything you need to know, doesn't it? It was never about the paycheck. At his core, Jim Collins is a teacher. And for a teacher, the absolute worst thing you can do is keep a powerful lesson to yourself. He had to share it with the world.
Okay, so let's get to the good stuff. What are these $100 million ideas? What do they actually find? Let's break down the big ones.
All right, first up, something they called Level 5 leadership. Now look, this is not your typical flashy celebrity CEO. Forget the big egos. These leaders are a strange mix. On one hand, they're incredibly humble. They'd much rather talk about the team than themselves. But on the other hand, they have this fierce, unstoppable drive. They are absolutely determined to see the company succeed no matter what it takes. Then there's this idea of first who, then what. This is totally backwards from how most people think you run a business. These Level 5 leaders, they didn't start by saying, here's my grand vision. No, they started by asking, who's getting on this bus with me? They were obsessed with getting the absolute right people on the bus, and, just as importantly, getting the wrong people off the bus. Once they had the right team, then they'd all figure out where to drive it. It's people over strategy every time.
Okay, this next one is really cool. It's called the hedgehog concept, and it's all about finding a powerful simplicity. Imagine 3 overlapping circles. The first circle is, what are you truly passionate about? The second, what can you be the absolute best in the world at? And the third, what actually makes you money? That sweet spot, right in the middle where all 3 overlap, that's your hedgehog concept. That becomes your North Star for every single decision.
And finally, how does all this come together? Well, it's not some magic aha moment or one lucky break. Collins calls it the flywheel. Picture a massive, heavy metal wheel. Getting it to move at first is just brutal. You push and push, and it barely budges. But you keep pushing, and it moves a little more, and a little more. And then with all that consistent, disciplined effort, turn after turn, it starts to build its own momentum. And pretty soon, that thing is unstoppable. That's how greatness happens. Not in a flash, but with relentless, consistent pushing.
All right, so we've talked about these giant companies, but here's where it gets really interesting. This is where the author looks right at you, the reader, and makes it personal.
He's basically saying, hey, don't just leave this stuff in the business world. He's challenging you to ask yourself, how can I use these ideas? You know, the hedgehog concept, pushing the flywheel, being a level 5 leader. How does that apply to my job, or maybe to a nonprofit I work with, or heck, even just in my own personal life?
And so that brings us right back to the very beginning. If we accept that being good is the real enemy of being great, then the final question isn't for some CEO in a skyscraper. The question is for you. What are you going to build? What will you do to push past good enough and create something that's truly meant to last?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to crack open a study that absolutely changed the game for businesses everywhere. Jim Collins' Good to Great. We're going to dive into this massive 5-year research project that tried to answer one huge question: how do perfectly average companies make the leap to become truly great and stay that way?
And you know, this whole thing, it all kicks off with this one simple but really powerful idea. It sounds kind of obvious at first, right? But just think about it for a second. It's a huge insight into why so few people or companies or anything really ever achieve true greatness.
And that's the paradox, isn't it? I mean, being good feels like you've succeeded. But what this research found is that being satisfied with just being good, well, that's the very thing that stops you from ever pushing to become great. And this doesn't just apply to companies. We see it in schools, in governments, even in our own lives. How often does settling for a good life get in the way of striving for a great one?
So here it is, the big question. Is it actually possible for an average, everyday organization to transform itself into a powerhouse that performs at the highest level for years and years? It was exactly this question that launched one of the biggest, most ambitious business studies ever done. You know, the story of how this whole 5-year journey got started? Well, it didn't begin in some fancy research lab. Nope. It actually started at a dinner party with a pretty blunt and totally unexpected challenge to the author, Jim Collins.
Can you even imagine? You pour years of your life into a best-selling book, and then someone tells you it's useless. That's literally what happened. Bill Meehan, who was a big-shot managing director at McKinsey, just lays this verbal gut punch on him. He said that while he loved Collins's other book, it had this one major flaw that made it pretty much irrelevant for most companies out there.
And that right there, that's the key problem Meehan pointed out. See, the companies in Collins's first book, Built to Last, they were kind of born great. They had these amazing founders. They were exceptional right from the start. But that's not much help to the thousands of companies that are already up and running who look around and realize, hey, we're just good. And that one observation, that planted the seed for this massive 5-year quest for an answer.
So, with that challenge basically thrown in his face, Collins and his research team set off on what they called an odyssey of curiosity. They wanted to find out once and for all if good really could become great, and if it could, how on earth did it happen?
Okay, so to get to the bottom of this, first they had to find the right companies to study. And they had really specific criteria. They weren't looking for the companies that were always superstars. Not at all. They spent months digging through decades of data to find a very particular pattern. Companies that just chugged along for years, getting average market-level results. And then, suddenly, they hit this clear transition point. And after that point, their performance just exploded and stayed high for at least 15 years.
And when I say their performance exploded, I mean the results were just staggering. Get this. If you had invested $1 in a mutual fund of these good to great companies back in 1965, by the year 2000, that $1 would have turned into $471. That same dollar invested in the general stock market, it would have only grown to $56. It's not even close. Let me put it another way. In the 15 years after they hit their turning point, these companies, on average, gave their investors returns that were almost 7 times better than the general market. We're talking about beating giants like GE and Coca-Cola. It's just phenomenal.
But here's where the study gets really, really smart. See, it's not enough to just look at the winners. I love this Olympics analogy they used. If you only study gold medal winners, you'll find out they all had coaches. But guess what? So did all the athletes who didn't even make it past the first round. The real question isn't what the great companies have in common. It's what did they do differently than the companies that didn't become great? So that's what they did. They created a control group. For every single one of the 11 good to great companies they identified, they found a direct comparison company, one from the same industry with the same opportunities, same resources, but one that just stayed good. So for example, they put the incredible success of Walgreens right up against the flat performance of its direct rival, Eckerd.
And then the real work began. The team spent the next 5 years, that's more than 10.5 person-years of effort, just digging through this absolute mountain of data. They read thousands of articles, conducted thousands of pages of interviews, just analyzed every little detail they could find to figure out what really separated the great from the good. Their whole goal was to crack open this black box. What were the secret ingredients? What was happening on the inside that could take a company that was just getting by and turn it into this incredible machine that produced amazing results year after year after year?
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. Some of the biggest discoveries they made weren't about what they found, but about what they didn't find. These were the dogs that didn't bark. You know, all the things that we assume are super important for success that turned out not to matter at all. First up, that whole myth of the rock star celebrity CEO you hire from the outside to come save the day, turns out it's a total bust. The data actually showed it was negatively correlated with making the leap to great. 10 out of the 11 leaders of these great companies actually came from inside. And what about all those complicated bonus and stock option plans for executives? The researchers found zero connection between how executives were paid and whether the company became great. So what about having a brilliant strategy or the latest technology? Well, it turns out that wasn't the magic bullet either. Both the good and the great companies had strategies. And technology, it didn't start the fire. The research showed that technology works like an accelerator for momentum you've already built. It doesn't create the momentum itself. And finally, all those big, splashy moves, huge mergers and acquisitions, the data was clear. Mashing 2 mediocre companies together does not create one great one. And all those massive change management programs, the good to great companies basically ignored them. They were just too busy doing the actual work. So after they threw out all these common myths, the team was left with this one incredibly powerful conclusion.
Greatness doesn't just happen to you because you got lucky or you were in the right industry at the right time. It's not about your circumstances. It's a matter of disciplined, conscious choice.
Okay, so if greatness is a conscious choice, what do those choices actually look like? Well, out of all that data, a very clear framework started to emerge. You could almost call it a map to greatness.
The number one metaphor to understand is the flywheel. This transformation from good to great, it never happened overnight. There was no single big action, no miracle moment. Instead, it was like pushing a giant, heavy flywheel. You push, and at first it barely moves, but you keep pushing, and it starts to build momentum, slowly. Then a little faster, until bam, you hit a point of breakthrough, and it's almost unstoppable.
And this whole flywheel process, it breaks down into 3 big stages. It all starts with disciplined people, getting the right people on the bus and the wrong people off. Then comes disciplined thought, which means having the courage to face the cold, hard facts of your reality. And finally, you have to take disciplined action, which creates that culture of discipline that builds and builds that unstoppable momentum.
So in the end, the principles they discovered in this incredible study, they don't just apply to giant corporations. They leave us with a really powerful question to think about for our own work, for our teams, and even for our own lives. What choices would we have to make to stop being satisfied with just being good and to start building towards something truly great?
So, have you ever wondered what really separates a good company from a great one? I mean, a truly lastingly great one? It's a huge question, right? And there are a million books out there claiming to have the answer. But the real answer, the one backed by some serious research, is probably not what you're thinking. So let's get into it and uncover this surprising secret to greatness. Okay, let's set the scene. It's 1971, and we're looking at Kimberly-Clark. A respectable company for sure, but kind of boring. A paper company. For 2 straight decades, their stock had actually fallen 36% behind the rest of the market. They were the very definition of just okay. And then the board makes this interesting choice for a new CEO, Darwin Smith. Now, this guy was the company's mild-mannered in-house lawyer. He wore these nerdy, black-rimmed glasses, and he looked more like a farm boy who was a little uncomfortable in his first suit than some corporate big shot. When a journalist actually asked him to describe his management style, he just sort of stared for a minute before saying one word, eccentric? But behind that quiet, awkward exterior was an absolutely fierce resolve. Smith and his team looked at their main business, coated paper, and they realized it was doomed. So he made what one board member later called the gutsiest move he had ever seen a CEO make. Smith decided to sell the paper mills. I mean, the entire legacy of the company. And he was going to pour all that money into a head-to-head war in the consumer goods market against giants like Procter & Gamble. Wall Street basically said he was nuts. But Smith, he just didn't waver. And these 2 charts, wow, they really tell the whole story. They show you just how huge this transformation was. Over the next 20 years, Smith turned that sleepy old paper company into an absolute powerhouse. He generated stock returns 4.1 times the general market and just left his rivals in the dust. Which, of course, brings us to the big mystery here. How did this guy, a man who spent his vacations on his farm digging holes with a backhoe, a man with seemingly zero charisma, how did he pull off one of the most incredible corporate turnarounds of the 20th century? What on earth was his secret? Well, the answer, which was uncovered by Jim Collins and his research team, was a concept they didn't even go looking for. They called it Level 5 leadership, and it's this fascinating mix of 2 things you would never expect to see together. Now, this wasn't just some clever theory they dreamed up. No, this was an empirical finding. It came straight from the data. The researchers found this 5-level pyramid of leadership skills, from capable individual all the way up. And here's the kicker. At the very top, in every single company that made that leap from good to truly great, they found a Level 5 leader, every single one. So, what is a Level 5 executive? Well, they are way more than just a good manager or an effective leader. They have this paradoxical combination of traits. On one hand, this deep, genuine personal humility, and on the other, an intense, almost ferocious professional will. Let's really break that paradox down because it's the whole key. On one side, you've got personal humility, and on the other, you have this fierce, stoic professional will. I mean, these 2 things really don't sound like they should go together, right? But in a Level 5 leader, they are totally inseparable. Let's look a little closer. The personal humility part means they're modest. They don't want the spotlight, and they channel all of their ambition into the company, not themselves. The professional will part, that means they have this unwavering resolve to do whatever it takes to get the best long-term results, no matter how hard it is. They are absolutely obsessed with making the company great. Okay, maybe the best way to really get this is to see it in action. And we can do that by comparing these level 5 leaders with their more famous, high-profile counterparts. The researchers came up with a great name for this, the plow horse versus the show horse. The plow horse, like Darwin Smith, is quiet, they're diligent, they just get the job done, no fanfare. For them, it's all about the company. The show horse, on the other hand, that's the celebrity CEO, the larger-than-life savior whose enormous ego is all about their own fame and their own fortune. For a perfect example of a plow horse, just listen to this story about Ken Iverson, the guy who turned Nucor into a steel giant. A colleague remembered him complaining one day that he'd broken his credit card while scraping frost off his car window because he only had a carport, not a garage. Now that's humility. And then you have the show horse. Meet Al Dunlap. He was brought in to lead Scott Paper, which was Kimberly-Clark's big rival. They called him Rambo in pinstripes. He bragged constantly, pocketed $100 million for just 603 days of work, and then wrote a book celebrating himself. I mean, the ego was just off the charts. So let's look at the result of the plow horse approach. Coleman Mockler, the quiet CEO of Gillette, fought off 3 hostile takeovers. Now, if he had just given in, the shareholders would have gotten a quick 44% pop on their stock. Nice, right? But because he fought for the company's long-term greatness, the people who stuck with him ended up 3 times better off. 3 times. And this gets at a really key difference in what drives them. A plow horse's ambition is for the company itself. They want to be able to look back one day and just say, yeah, I used to work there, and see it thriving. In contrast, those celebrity show horses, they often set up their successors to fail. I mean, think about it. What better way to prove your own greatness than for the company to fall apart right after you leave? So this all leads us to maybe the most powerful and practical idea of all. It's a simple metaphor that perfectly captures how these level 5 leaders think, and it's called the window and the mirror. Here's how it works. When the company hits it out of the park, when there's incredible success, the level 5 leader looks out the window. They point to their amazing team, to other executives, to factors outside the company, or they'll even just say, hey, we got lucky. It's never about them. But when things go badly, when the results are disappointing, they do the complete opposite. They look in the mirror. They take full 100% personal responsibility. They never, ever blame their people, they don't blame the market, and they certainly don't blame bad luck. Let's look at this in the real world. You had Nucor and Bethlehem Steel. Both faced the exact same threat, cheap steel imports from other countries. The CEO of Bethlehem Steel looked at the window, right? He said, our first, second, and third problems are imports. Blame, blame, blame. But Nucor's level 5 leader, Ken Iverson, he looked in the mirror. He saw imports as a lucky break that would force them to get better. And he said the real problem wasn't imports, it was American management. What a difference. So after all this, we're left with the final and most important question. It's a question a CEO actually asked the researchers after hearing all this. He said, look, I know I'm not level 5, but can you learn to become one? And the research seems to suggest that while, sure, some people might never get over their own ego, a lot of us probably have the seeds of level 5 inside of us. So the real question isn't whether it's possible. The real question is, are you willing to do the work to cultivate it?
What if I told you that the very first thing you think about when trying to build a great company is probably completely wrong? Today, we're diving into this really powerful, kind of counterintuitive idea from Jim Collins' huge research project. It's a principle that just flips conventional wisdom on its head.
So let's start with the big one, right? The question every leader asks themselves. You want to build something amazing? Where do you even begin? What's that crucial first move?
For most of us, the answer seems pretty obvious. You start with the destination, you come up with a bold new vision, you map out a brilliant strategy, and then you get everybody on board to go make it happen. You figure out the what and the where first.
But here's the thing. When the researchers actually dug into the data, when they looked at the companies that made that incredible leap from just being good to being truly great, they found something shocking. That whole conventional wisdom, it was totally backward. It's not what the great leaders did at all.
Instead, they followed this simple but profound idea. First who, then what. Their focus was all about getting the right people on the bus and, just as important, getting the wrong people off the bus.
And that's really the core of it. The leaders who pulled off these amazing transformations, they didn't start with a map. No, they started by building a world-class crew. They just knew that if you have the right team, you can figure out how to get just about anywhere. But if you have the wrong team, you're doomed, no matter how brilliant your map is.
So why does this who first thing work so well? Well, it boils down to 3 simple truths. First, if you have a team that's on the bus because of who else is on it, well, they can adapt to anything the world throws at them. Second, when you hire self-motivated people, the whole problem of trying to motivate them just goes away. And third, and this is a big one, a great vision is completely useless if you've got the wrong people trying to execute it.
The research also found this really stark contrast in leadership styles between the good to great companies and the ones they were compared to. Let's take a look at these 2 types.
So on one side, you have the good to great companies. They were led by what Collins calls level 5 leaders. These are humble execs who focused on the who first, on building that amazing team before they decided on the what. Then you have the comparison companies. They were often run by these really charismatic leaders, but they operated as a genius with 1,000 helpers. They set the vision all by themselves and then just brought people in to execute their plan.
Teledyne is just a perfect cautionary tale of this genius model. The CEO, Henry Singleton, was an absolute genius, a total individualist who built this massive empire. But the whole company was just a reflection of him. He didn't really build a team. He built a platform for his own incredible talent.
And, well, here's what happened. As long as the genius was running the show, the company was flying high. But this chart tells the whole story. The second Singleton left, the whole thing just started to fall apart. Why? Because those 1,000 helpers were totally lost without their genius. He built an amazing career for himself, no doubt, but he failed to build a great, lasting company.
Okay, so now let's compare that genius model with the story of 2 banks. Back in the 70s, the CEO of Wells Fargo was obsessed with one thing, getting an endless stream of the absolute best talent he could find, even if he didn't have a specific job for them yet. Meanwhile, Bank of America had this weak general, strong lieutenants model. They actually hired mediocre leaders on purpose so no one would challenge the guy at the top.
And the results were just staggering. I mean, look at this. Over 25 years, while Bank of America was barely keeping up with the market, Wells Fargo, powered by its A-team, just took off like a rocket. It outperformed the general market by more than 3 times. It's a perfect example. Same industry, totally different philosophies on people, and wildly different results.
So how do you actually put this into practice? The key here is to be rigorous, not ruthless. And believe me, this is a really, really important distinction.
Being rigorous means you have incredibly high standards, and you apply them consistently to everyone, at all levels, all the time. It's about building a true culture of excellence. Ruthlessness, on the other hand, is just hacking and cutting, mindless layoffs when times get tough. The good to great companies were definitely tough places to work, but they were always fair.
The research actually boiled this all down to 3 really practical rules. First, when in doubt, don't hire. Just keep looking. Second, the moment you know you need to make a people change, you have to act. Don't wait around. And third, here's a common mistake: assigning your best people to your biggest problems. The great companies did the opposite. They put their very best people on their biggest opportunities.
Now that second rule can be the toughest one, right? It's not easy. So how do you get that clarity? How do you really know when it's time to make a move?
Well, the research gives us 2 brilliantly simple questions to ask. First, knowing everything I know now, would I hire this person again? If the answer is anything but a resounding yes, well, you've got your answer. Second, if this person walked into my office tomorrow and said they were leaving, would I feel terribly disappointed or secretly a little relieved? That gut reaction tells you everything.
This first who idea also totally changes how we think about motivation and what a company's most important asset really is.
The researchers were sure they were going to find that executive pay was some kind of key driver for making a company great. But they were completely wrong. After sifting through all the data, they found 0 systematic link between how executives were paid and whether a company made that leap from good to great.
So here's the key takeaway on that. The right people, they're already motivated. They have this internal drive, this compulsion to build something excellent. You can't create that with a bonus.
The purpose of compensation is actually way simpler. It's to attract the right people to get on the bus, and then to value them enough so they want to stay there.
And this is where the whole idea gets bigger than just business strategy. It turns out that following first who might just be the closest link there is between building a great company and building a great life.
Take this story about Coleman Mockler, the CEO who transformed Gillette. After he passed away, a colleague's wife was at the funeral, and she looked around and had this incredible realization. Mockler built a great company because he filled it with people he loved and respected, people who were as passionate as he was. And you know what? He had a great life for the exact same reason. And that really brings us to the final, ultimate takeaway. We've all heard that old saying, people are your most important asset, but it turns out that's not quite right. It's more specific. The right people are your most important asset.
And so, this whole idea leaves us with one last really powerful question to think about, not just for our careers, but for our whole lives. Who is on your bus?
You know, one of the most powerful ideas in business, and in life really, comes from Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. And it's a total paradox. It goes like this. You have got to confront the most brutal, difficult facts of your reality head on. And yet, at the very same time, you can never, ever lose faith that you'll win in the end. It sounds like it can't be true, right? But it turns out that contradiction is the secret to greatness. So, to see how this works in the real world, let's look at a story of two grocery store chains, A&P and Kroger. For years, as you can see, they were both, well, kind of boring, just chugging along, keeping pace with the market. But then, after 1973, something absolutely dramatic happens. Their paths just split wide open. Kroger's stock goes to the moon. We're talking returns 80 times better than A&P. 80 times!
So that's the big question we're going to unpack. How does that happen? I mean, A&P wasn't some small-time player. At one point, it was the biggest retailer in the world. Kroger was less than half its size, and they were facing the same customers, the same economy, the same changing world. What on earth made one fly and the other completely fall apart?
All right, to get to the bottom of this, we've got to do a little autopsy on A&P's collapse. Because this wasn't just some old company getting pushed aside by a new, shiny competitor. Nope. As we're about to see, this was all about the choices its leaders made when reality came knocking.
And what's really wild is just how similar these two companies were on paper. They were both old-school, established companies. All their money was tied up in those traditional grocery store formats. And here's the kicker. They both knew the world was changing. They saw the era of the superstore coming. The only difference, the one that determined everything, was how they decided to respond.
And right here, this was A&P's fatal flaw. The leadership team was completely obsessed with the past. The company was literally run by asking, what would our dead founder have done? They were so in love with their past success that they used it as a shield to ignore the very uncomfortable facts of the present.
And if you want to see this denial in action, get this. They ran an experiment called the Golden Key. It was a new type of store, basically a test run for the modern superstore. And you know what? Customers loved it. It was a literal roadmap showing them the way to the future. But the executives didn't like the answers the map was giving them because it meant their old way was wrong. So what did they do? They just closed it down. Unbelievable.
And this is the core lesson right here. You simply cannot make good decisions over and over again if you don't start by confronting the brutal facts. It's step one. It's the foundation. Kroger did it. They looked at the data and said, you know what? Our old stores are dinosaurs. So they systematically started changing everything. A&P? Well, they just refused to look.
You know, Winston Churchill knew this in his bones. During World War II, even with his unbreakable belief that they would win, he set up a special department completely outside the normal chain of command. Its only job, to feed him the most brutal, unfiltered facts, no matter how bad they were. He knew you couldn't lead based on wishful thinking.
And this isn't some one-off story from the grocery aisle. We see the exact same pattern play out in other industries. Take Pitney Bowes versus Addressograph. Up until the mid-70s, these guys were practically twins. Similar companies, similar markets. Both were about to lose their monopolies. And then, boom, same story. Pitney Bowes soared while Addressograph just collapsed.
So what was the difference there? Well, the leader of Addressograph was this really charismatic guy who was so in love with his own big vision that he just refused to see any facts that didn't fit his story. Even after the company went bankrupt and top people were jumping ship, he was still out there claiming we were winning the war. His charisma actually became a weakness, blinding the whole organization to what was really happening.
Okay, so we get it. Confronting the facts is a big deal. But how do you actually do it? How do you create a culture where the truth can be heard, especially when you're the person in charge?
Well, the research points to 4 really practical things. First, you've got to lead with questions, not answers. Get people thinking for themselves. Second, you have to encourage real dialogue and debate, not fighting, but arguing over ideas. Third, when mistakes happen, and they always do, you perform an autopsy, but without pointing fingers. The goal is to learn, not to blame. And finally, you have to build in what are called red flag mechanisms, little systems that make it impossible to ignore the tough data.
This right here is a masterclass in that autopsy without blame idea. So Philip Morris bought 7-Up, and the deal was a total failure. Did the CEO, Joe Coleman, blame his team? Nope. He stood up and basically said, "This was my plan, and it didn't work." He took the hit. When a leader does that, it tells everyone else that it's safe to be honest about failure. And that's how you learn.
So these business stories are powerful, no doubt. But the most profound, most unforgettable example of this whole principle, it doesn't come from a boardroom. It comes from a place of unimaginable hardship.
Let me introduce you to Admiral Jim Stockdale. He was the highest-ranking American officer in the infamous Hanoi Hilton prisoner of war camp during the Vietnam War. He was imprisoned for 8 years, tortured more than 20 times. He had no idea when or even if he would ever get out alive.
When Jim Collins interviewed him years later, Stockdale said this. He explained that through all the torture, all the uncertainty, he held on to an absolute, unwavering faith that he would get out, and that he would turn that horrible experience into the defining moment of his life.
But then Collins asked a follow-up question. He asked, who are the ones who didn't make it out? And Stockdale's answer was completely shocking. "Oh, that's easy," he said, "the optimists." He explained that they were the ones who would say, "We're going to be out by Christmas," and then Christmas would come and it would go. Then they'd say, "We'll be out by Easter," and Easter would come and go. And eventually, he said, they just died of a broken heart. They couldn't survive the constant crushing of their own unrealistic hopes.
And this right here is the Stockdale Paradox. You must keep the faith that you will prevail in the end, no matter what, and at the exact same time, you must confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. It's not one or the other. You have to do both.
And this powerful idea brings us full circle. It perfectly captures that critical difference between real faith and just blind optimism. See, faith is that deep-down belief that you'll prevail in the end. Blind optimism is just hoping you'll be out by Christmas.
Now think back to our grocery stores. A&P, they were the optimists. We'll be fine. We've got 100 years of success. They died of a broken heart, so to speak. But Kroger, they were the realists who also had faith. They looked at the brutal fact, our old model is extinct. But they never lost faith that they could figure out a new way to win. And in the end, they prevailed.
So what's the bottom line for us? First, greatness doesn't just come from a vision. It starts with an honest look in the mirror. Second, a leader's most important job is to create an environment where the truth is welcomed, not punished. Third, we have to learn to live in that paradox, balancing total faith with brutal honesty. And finally, just remember, the right people on your team, they aren't motivated by happy talk. They're motivated by reality and the challenge of changing it.
You know, this isn't just a lesson for a CEO. It's a lesson for all of us. So the real question is this. In our own work, in our own lives, do we have the courage to hold both sides of that paradox, to have that absolute, unshakable faith that we're going to make it, while also having the discipline to confront the toughest, most brutal facts of where we are right now?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're breaking down one of the most powerful ideas from Jim Collins' classic, Good to Great. It's a really simple concept that explains a huge question. Why do some organizations make that leap to lasting success, while so many others just don't?
So it all kicks off with a simple question, one that's actually inspired by this ancient Greek parable that splits the whole world into 2 very different ways of thinking.
No, seriously, think about it for a second. How do you usually tackle problems? In your job, in your life? When you look at the world, do you see all the crazy, tangled complexity? Or are you always hunting for that one single unifying idea that cuts through all the noise?
You see, the fox is clever. He's cunning. He knows a little bit about everything. He chases a dozen different goals at once, seeing the world in all its complicated glory. He's kind of scattered, always after the next new thing, but the hedgehog, he's a much simpler creature. He takes this incredibly complex world and boils it down to one single organizing idea. And in the daily battle between them, guess what? The hedgehog always wins.
And that one big thing, that is the absolute key to understanding why some companies become truly great, while others, who are just as smart, just fall short. It's all about finding that one big thing and then going after it with an almost obsessive focus. It's a simple idea, but man, it changes the entire game. Okay, let's really get into it.
Okay, so how do you actually do it? How do you go from being that scattered fox to a super focused hedgehog? Well, it's not something you figure out in a weekend strategy session. It really starts with a deep and honestly often pretty slow process of understanding three crucial areas.
And let's be super clear. This is not just some fluffy mission statement you hang on the wall. A real hedgehog concept is a profound insight. It's so clear and simple that it guides every single decision you make. It's the fundamental truth of what your organization is actually built to do.
So the first circle, this one requires you to be brutally honest with yourself. It's not about what you want to be the best at. It's not even about what you're pretty good at right now. It's about digging deep and figuring out what you have the genuine potential to do better than anyone else on the planet.
All right, circle number 2 is about what really powers your finances. You have to find the one single metric, that one denominator, that has the biggest and most sustainable impact. Think of it like finding the economic heartbeat of your company. For a retailer like Walgreens, it was profit per customer visit. For a software business, it could be profit per subscriber. You find that one number that if you can just push it, changes everything.
And the third circle, well, you just can't fake this one. It's about what you and your people are truly, deeply passionate about. The great companies, they don't try to manufacture passion with motivational posters. They figure out what genuinely ignites their team, and then they build their entire system around that fire.
Now this is so important. The magic only happens right there in the middle, where all three circles overlap. Having just 2 out of 3, it's not enough. You could be the best in the world at something you're passionate about, but if there's no economic engine, you're going to go broke. And here's why this is a game changer. Once you find that intersection, it becomes a super simple filter for every decision. If a new opportunity doesn't fit right in the middle of all three circles, the answer is just no.
Okay, so that's the theory, right? The 3 circles, the hedgehog. But does it actually work in the real world? Oh yeah. Let's look at the proof, because the results are absolutely staggering. This isn't just some nice idea. It's a proven engine for blowing past the competition.
So let's take a look at a classic tale of 2 companies, Eckerd and Walgreens. Back in 1981, they were basically identical in size and revenue, but their mindsets were worlds apart. Eckerd was the fox. They chased growth everywhere, even buying a home video company that ended up losing millions. Walgreens, on the other hand, was the hedgehog. They became fanatically consistent.
Their concept was so simple, almost deceptively so. And their execution was absolutely relentless. They were the ones who pioneered drive-through pharmacies. They would tear down an already profitable store just to build an even better one on a corner lot. They even clustered their stores, sometimes just a few blocks apart, to completely own the idea of convenience in a neighborhood.
And the result? Just look at this chart. I mean, wow. That towering black line shooting into the sky, that's Walgreens. That's not the result of some super complex strategy. That's the explosive power of simplicity and incredible discipline. They ended up outperforming market giants like GE, Intel, and Coca-Cola. And this wasn't just a one-off thing, This wasn't some lucky break. This same exact pattern showed up again and again across totally different industries. The companies that made the leap to great didn't get there by making flashy, ego-driven goals. They got there through a deep, quiet understanding of who they really were. I mean, check this out. It's like night and day. On the left, before 1984, Fannie Mae was just meh, a mediocre company, actually trailing the market. But then they clarified their hedgehog concept, which was to become the absolute best capital markets player in anything related to mortgages. And after that, look at the chart on the right. Their growth became exponential, totally leaving their fox-like competitor in the dust.
Okay, so this is probably the question on your mind right now. How do I find this? For my company, for my own career, how do you find your one big thing? Well, the answer is that it's not a lightning bolt of inspiration. It's a process.
4 years. That's how long it took on average for these good to great companies to really nail down their hedgehog concept. So yeah, this is not something you're going to figure out on a weekend retreat. It's an iterative journey of discovery.
Because, see, real insight doesn't just strike you out of the blue. It comes from this continuous cycle of disciplined thought and action. A lot of these companies even created a special group, called the Council, just to keep this loop of deep, honest questioning going.
In this cycle, it's all about forcing that deep, honest conversation about those three circles. You ask the really tough questions. You have real dialogue and debate with the right people. You make decisions based on that debate. And then, and this is key, you perform autopsies. You analyze the results with brutal honesty, and you feed that learning right back into the next round of questions.
You know, there's this great personal story about this concept. This wasn't some bold, arrogant boast. It was a calm, quiet statement from the author's wife, Joanne. And she said it only after she had gained this deep, crystal-clear understanding of her own three circles, her genetic gifts for endurance sports, her incredible passion for competing, and the actual economics of being a pro athlete. Her goal came from understanding, not ego. And you know what? She went on to become the world champion. And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? When you finally find that perfect intersection, what you can be the best at, what truly drives your engine, and what you are deeply passionate about. It's not a loud boast. It's a quiet truth. It's this simple, clear note that just rings true and has the power to change absolutely everything. So what's yours? Because taking the time to find it and having the discipline to stick with it, that is what separates the good from the truly great.
All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are jumping into one of the biggest ideas from Jim Collins' classic book, Good to Great. We're talking about how the most elite companies on the planet build an absolutely unbreakable culture of discipline. And you know, to really get this, let's start with a really powerful idea from Viktor Frankl. He's basically saying, look, freedom is amazing, but it's only half the equation. For every ounce of freedom, you need an equal ounce of responsibility. And it's mastering that tension, that's where greatness lives. So that's the big question for us today, right? How do the best companies get all the magic and energy of entrepreneurial freedom without descending into total chaos? And how do they get the laser focus of discipline without just crushing everyone's spirit? But before we can even talk about the solution, we've got to understand the problem. And it's this crazy paradox that so many successful startups run into. The very growth they've been fighting for can actually start to poison them in what Collins calls the entrepreneurial death spiral. You can almost picture it, right? The company takes off. Suddenly there are more people, more customers, more everything. And what used to be this fun, nimble, agile thing, well, it turns into a giant, messy ball of chaos. You start tripping over your own success. It creates friction with customers, messes with your cash flow. It's a mess. So what's the knee-jerk reaction? It's always the same. We need to professionalize. So in come the managers with their fancy resumes, the processes, the rules, the layers of hierarchy. And yeah, it creates some order, but it's so often a deal with the devil because it just strangles the creativity and the spirit that made the company special in the first place. The magic just kind of dies. And this chart illustrates the trap perfectly. See, most companies get stuck. They're either a chaotic startup or a rigid bureaucracy. But greatness lives in that top right quadrant. It's where you marry a high ethic of entrepreneurship with a high culture of discipline. The real question is, how on earth do you get there? Well, the answer isn't what you'd expect. It's not about more rules. It's about building something totally different. A powerful alternative that gives people freedom within a framework. Okay, this is absolutely the key idea. You don't need layers of bureaucracy if you have the right, self-disciplined people to begin with. The great companies, what they do is they build a really consistent system with super clear boundaries. And then they trust their people. They give them the freedom and the responsibility to operate inside it. The goal is to manage the system, not the people. To make this real, just think about an airline pilot. Picture it. She's in charge of this massive $84 million machine with hundreds of lives in her hands, and she's flying right into a nasty storm. Now, she operates within an incredibly rigid system, right? Checklists, air traffic control. She can't just decide to get creative and try something new. But, and this is the key point, when it comes to the most critical decisions, like aborting a landing or diverting to a new airport, the final call is hers, and only hers. She has immense freedom and responsibility within that highly disciplined framework. That's the model we're talking about. Now, I know what you might be thinking. When you hear the word discipline, it's easy to picture some dictator at the top, just barking orders. But that is the single biggest misconception. So let's talk about the huge difference between a true culture of discipline and just plain old tyranny. Let's just put it right out there. Is this whole culture of discipline thing just a fancy way of saying you need a tyrant running the show? The answer, according to the research, is a hard no. The difference is massive. It's night and day. A real culture of discipline is built by what Collins calls a level 5 leader, someone who's humble but driven for the company's success, not their own ego. That kind of culture lasts. Tyranny, on the other hand, is forced on people by a big ego level 4 leader. All the discipline comes from that one person, and the second they leave, the whole thing just crumbles. And if you need proof, just look at this. These charts for companies like Burroughs and Rubbermaid, they show the tyrant effect perfectly. You see this spectacular rise when the disciplinarian leader is in charge, followed by an equally spectacular crash the minute they walk out the door. Personal tyranny does not build lasting greatness. It just doesn't. So if it's not a tyrant, what does a real culture of discipline actually look like on a day-to-day basis? Well, it all starts with this fanatical, almost religious focus on one simple core idea. This was basically the mantra for all the good to great companies. Their hedgehog concept, as Collins calls it, is that sweet spot where three things overlap: what you can be the absolute best in the world at, what drives your economic engine, and what you're deeply passionate about. And if any opportunity, no matter how shiny, didn't fit right in the middle of that circle, they just said no. Period. Nucor Steel is the textbook example of this. Their hedgehog concept was crystal clear. Use culture and technology to make low-cost steel and do it with a burning passion for an equal, fair system where everyone's interests are aligned. Simple, powerful, and they never wavered from it. And then they didn't just talk about it, they lived it with this fanatical discipline. Just look at the difference between them and their competitor, Bethlehem Steel. Nucor had one dining hall for everybody. Bethlehem had special executive dining rooms. At Nucor, everyone wore the same color hard hat. At Bethlehem, they used different colors to show status. This isn't just fluffy stuff. It's discipline baked into the very fabric of the company. Okay, let me ask you a really simple question. We all have to-do lists, right? They're probably a mile long, and they're always getting longer as we try to cram more and more in. But here's the twist. Here's the counterintuitive discipline that the great companies mastered. They were just as serious, if not more so, about their stop-doing lists. They understood that real focus isn't just about what you do, it's about what you have the courage to stop doing. Ultimately, all of this comes down to a certain mindset, a level of personal diligence that to an outsider might seem a little extreme. And there's a simple story that captures it perfectly. So you have to remember the sequence. It all builds on itself. First, you get disciplined people. Then, those people engage in disciplined thought. And only then do you get disciplined action. And the attitude that makes all of this possible is what Collins calls rinsing your cottage cheese. So this comes from Dave Scott, a guy who won the Ironman triathlon 6 times. This man was burning over 5,000 calories a day in training. Okay, he did not have a weight problem, but he had this belief that a super low-fat diet gave him a tiny edge. So what did he do? He would literally take his cottage cheese and rinse it under water to wash away that tiny little extra bit of fat. Now, the point isn't that rinsing cottage cheese won the Ironman. Of course not. The point is that it was one more small discipline step that when added to 1,000 other small discipline steps, that's what creates a champion. And really, that's the big idea I want to leave you with. It's a question for you to think about. In your work, in your company, in your own life. What's that small, seemingly crazy act of discipline that when you do it over and over again, could separate good from great? What's your cottage cheese? You've probably heard it a million times. To win, your company absolutely has to have the latest and greatest technology. But what if that's completely backward? Today, we are diving into a really powerful and kind of counterintuitive idea from Jim Collins' classic, Good to Great. And that idea is this: technology doesn't create greatness, it accelerates it. I mean, this quote from Bertrand Russell, it just hits different, right? It perfectly sets the stage. Because when everyone is swept up in some new hype, some massive change, the absolute hardest and most critical thing you can do is just stop and think. And as you're about to see, that simple act is what separates the truly great companies from the ones that just get by. All right, let's jump in the time machine and go back to the height of the dot-com bubble. It was an absolutely insane time where the whole mantra was built to flip, and the old proven rules of business suddenly seemed, well, irrelevant. And right in the middle of this chaos, we find this classic showdown, the hot new thing versus the old guard. So on one side, you've got drugstore.com. In 1999, it goes public and its valuation just explodes to over $3.5 billion, even though it had pretty much no track record. The media, the gurus, they were all calling it the future. And on the other side, oh boy, you had Walgreens. Facing this new online threat, their stock was getting absolutely hammered. Analysts were downgrading them left and right, and the consensus was they were just old, stodgy, and totally out of touch. So with billions in market value just evaporating and the pressure mounting like crazy, what did Walgreens do? They didn't panic. They didn't rush to just copy their new competitor. Nope. They did something that was truly radical for the time. They paused, they reflected, and they actually used their brains. And their entire strategy, the result of all that thinking, could be boiled down to 3 simple, powerful words: crawl, walk, run. It is a total masterclass in disciplined innovation, especially when faced with chaos. So let's break down exactly how they pulled it off. First, they crawled. They didn't just throw a website online and hope for the best. They quietly experimented, always asking, how does this actually help our core mission of convenience? Then came the walk. They started linking the site to their powerful back-end systems, for things like online refills that you could pick up at the drive-thru. And only then, only after they had proven the concept and knew it worked, did they start to run, launching a really sophisticated website that just accelerated what they already did best. And the results? Oh, the results just speak for themselves. Within a single year of that .com low point, Walgreens stock had nearly doubled. And drugstore.com, it lost almost all of its value. It basically went from run to walk to crawl. This just perfectly shows the difference between a frantic reaction and disciplined, thoughtful action. I absolutely love this quote from a Walgreens executive back then. It just captures this quiet, determined confidence, It's the attitude of an organization that knows exactly who it is and what it's trying to do. No hype, no panic, just pure focus. The Walgreens story, it's just a perfect example of a much bigger principle at play. So let's zoom out for a second and really unpack what these good to great companies understand about the true role of technology. Now, this is where we get to the core concept, the flywheel. Think of a great company as a massive, heavy flywheel. It takes a ton of consistent, hard pushing, all in one direction just to get it moving. Technology isn't the first push. Technology is the turbo booster you apply after the flywheel is already spinning. It accelerates momentum that's already there. It can't create it from a dead stop. Okay, so how do you know which technologies to even bother with? It all comes down to this. You have to filter every single decision through what Collins calls the hedgehog concept. You have to find that sweet spot, that intersection of what you're passionate about, what you can be the absolute best at, and what really drives your finances. That becomes the lens through which you view everything. And you see this principle everywhere. Kroger didn't pioneer scanners just because they were cool. They used them to perfect their inventory management, which was key to their economic engine. Gillette didn't just buy new machines. They pioneered super sophisticated tech like laser welding, because being the best in the world at making high-quality blades was their core mission. In every single case, the technology was a direct servant to their hedgehog concept. But, of course, there's a dark side to all this. If technology can accelerate momentum, well, it can also accelerate you right off a cliff if you're already pointing in the wrong direction. And this, my friends, is the technology trap. This right here might be the single most important finding in the whole book on this topic. The research is clear. Technology, by itself, is almost never the root cause of a company's success or its failure. The real cause is pretty much always found in its management and its strategy. Just look at Bethlehem Steel. The common story is that they were killed by new mini-mill technology. But if you look at the data, their decline was well underway for years before that tech ever became a major threat. Bad management had already created this downward spiral. Technology just hit the gas pedal on the way down. It accelerated their existing momentum, which just happened to be negative. The book uses this incredibly powerful analogy. Having superior technology is useless. It can even be a liability if it's not linked to a simple winning concept. A thoughtless reliance on technology without a clear purpose just makes your own self-created problems happen faster. And this just shatters another huge myth, the idea that you have to be first. Come on, history is just littered with the graves of technology pioneers. Remember VisiCalc, the very first spreadsheet? Yeah, Probably not. And there's a reason for that. The winners are often the second, third, or even fourth to the party, the ones who figure out how to best apply the technology to a solid business model. So if it's not about being first, and it's not about having the newest shiny object, what is it about? Well, it really all boils down to a fundamental difference in motivation. Get this, when executives from all the good to great companies were interviewed, a full 80% of them, 80%, didn't even mention technology as one of the top 5 factors in their company's success. I mean, that's just a stunning statistic, and it tells you exactly where their focus was. And this right here perfectly illustrates the core difference. Mediocre companies are driven by fear, the fear of being left behind. They react frantically to every single new trend. Great companies, though, they're driven by an internal passion for excellence. They respond with discipline, asking not what's everyone else doing, but how does this tool help us do our mission better? Because at the end of the day, that's all technology is, a tool. It can't fix a broken culture. It can't create visionary leadership. It can't magically give you a culture of discipline. And it certainly can't replace a deep, fundamental understanding of your core purpose. Those are the human things, and they are what truly drive greatness. So this leaves us with a final and I think a really crucial question. As we face the next huge wave of change, whether it's AI or whatever comes next, are we going to react with fear, just chasing the hype? Or will we respond like Walgreens did, with that quiet, disciplined confidence that comes from an unwavering focus on a core mission? The answer to that question just might determine everything. You know that story we all love? The one about the overnight success? That huge, explosive breakthrough that just seems to pop up out of nowhere? Well, what if I told you that whole story, the one we see in the headlines, is basically a myth? Let's pull back the curtain and see what's really going on behind these incredible tales of greatness. So let's just ask it straight up. Is this whole idea of overnight success a complete lie? Well, if you look at the research from Jim Collins' landmark study, Good to Great, it turns out that from the inside, that big breakthrough moment feels nothing, and I mean nothing, like an overnight event. Just look at this chart for Circuit City. For a full decade, from about 1972 to 1982, its stock was just flat. The national press? Not a single article written about them. They were just quietly grinding away, completely unnoticed, and then all of a sudden, boom! The value just skyrockets, and the media finally discovers its new overnight success. But see, the real story here isn't the rocket ship launch, it's the 10 years of runway that nobody ever bothered to look at. Okay, so let's really dig in and dismantle this myth. For our first section, we're going to explore what's actually happening when we see one of these supposedly sudden breakthroughs. This right here really gets to the heart of it. From the outside, a breakthrough looks like this shocking, revolutionary event, like an egg just suddenly cracking open. But for the actual people inside the company, it's this slow, organic, developmental process, right? The chicken was growing the entire time. The hatching part is just the very last, most visible step of a much, much longer journey. And, this wasn't just a one-off feeling. Across the board, executives from all these great companies basically said the same thing. This quote from Walgreens exec, it just sums it up perfectly. There was no miracle moment, no single giant light bulb that just switched on. It was an evolution. So, if it's not some miracle moment, then what in the world is it? Well, it's something way more powerful. In Section 2, we're going to talk about the concept that completely replaces the myth, the unstoppable flywheel. Okay, I want you to actually picture this. Imagine a massive 5,000-pound metal disc. It's mounted horizontally on an axle. We're talking 30 feet across and 2 feet thick. And your job, your only job, is to get that thing spinning. So you get down, and you give it one enormous push. And it barely moves. So you do it again. And again. You just keep pushing, always in the same consistent direction, turn by turn, hour after hour, year after year. And the flywheel slowly, almost painfully, starts to build a little speed. Then it gets a little easier. And then, at some point, breakthrough. The momentum of the thing just takes over and it's hurtling forward with this incredible, unstoppable force. That is what building greatness really feels like. And hey, this isn't just some business idea. Think about the legendary UCLA basketball coach, John Wooden. Do you have any idea how many years he pushed his flywheel before he won his very first NCAA championship? 15. 15 long years of building his system day in and day out before he finally hit that breakthrough that launched an absolute dynasty. And this, right here, is the flywheel effect in action. See, you take these consistent steps, all in one clear direction. That leads to results you can actually see. And those results, they get people fired up. They see that it's working, so they want to jump in and push with you, which just builds even more momentum. It's this beautiful, self-reinforcing loop. But what happens when companies try to skip that whole slow, patient buildup? Well, they fall into something much, much more destructive. This brings us to Section 3, the lurching doom loop. I mean, just check out this history from Warner Lambert. It's wild. In '79, they want to be a consumer products giant. Okay. A year later, nope, scratch that, they're all in on healthcare. Oh, wait, a year after that, they reverse course back to consumer goods. Then, a few years later, another U-turn back to healthcare. Instead of pushing their flywheel in one consistent direction, they just kept stopping it and trying to shove it in a completely new direction over and over again. And that is the doom loop. It all starts when you react without any deep understanding. Of course, this leads to disappointing results because you haven't built up any momentum. So what do? You lurch to some new program, a new leader, the latest fad, just hoping for a miracle. And the downward spiral just keeps going. So what we really have here is a choice. It's two completely different paths, and they lead to two very, very different destinies. And here they are right next to each other. On the left, you've got that beautiful, reinforcing upward curve of the flywheel. And on the right, well, you've got the chaotic, jagged, lurching downward path of the doom loop. The visual difference is just so stark, and believe me, so are the results. Okay, this is really the crucial difference. Flywheel companies patiently build up, and then they break through. Doom loop companies, they try to skip the build-up entirely. Flywheel companies use big moves, like acquisitions, to accelerate the momentum they already have. Doom loop companies use them to try and create momentum out of thin air. And that one distinction, that is everything. And hey, if you need proof, here it is in black and white. Abbott Labs was a classic flywheel company. Its competitor, Upjohn, was stuck in the doom loop. For years and years, their stocks look almost identical. And then, just look at that divergence. Once Abbott's flywheel finally hit that breakthrough speed, it just left Upjohn completely in the dust. I mean, the results are just undeniable. Okay, this is all really fascinating stuff, but the real question is, how do you actually apply any of this? So in our final section, we're going to look at exactly that, how to build your own momentum. So here's a little diagnostic for you. How do you know if you're on the flywheel? Well, do you see a real pattern of buildup, not just big, flashy one-offs? Is your direction consistent? Are you willing to confront the brutal facts of your situation? And maybe the biggest tell, do you feel that infectious momentum starting to build? Are your results starting to speak for themselves so you don't have to constantly sell some story about the future? You know, the secret sauce that makes the flywheel so incredibly powerful is this concept called coherence. It's the idea that each and every piece of what you're doing reinforces all the other pieces. It's a system where 1 + 1 doesn't just equal 2, it equals 4 or 8 or even 16. It's that amazing magnifying effect that creates truly unstoppable momentum. So that really leaves us with one last crucial question to think about. When you look at your own work, your team, maybe even your own life, what's the one consistent direction you should be pushing? Because finding that direction and then just pushing, turn after turn, that's the real secret behind every single great success story.
So, you've probably heard of Jim Collins, right? He wrote two absolute titans of business books, Built to Last and Good to Great. Now, these were based on totally separate, massive research projects, done years apart. But here's the thing, how do they actually fit together? Let's dive in and crack the code on building something that truly, truly endures.
And that was the exact puzzle his research team was facing. I mean, think about it. You've got this incredible study, Built to Last, that looks at companies that were pretty much great from day one. Then you start a whole new project asking a completely different question. What do? Do you try to build on the old research, or do you just ignore it and risk contradicting yourself?
Well, the answer they found was a total surprise. It's the big reveal that connects everything.
Good to Great is not the follow-up to Built to Last. Nope. It's the prequel. It's all the foundational stuff you have to get right before you can even begin to think about building an institution that lasts for generations. So, to get to that answer, the team made a really smart, really crucial decision. To avoid their own biases, and that's huge, they decided to run the Good to Great study as if Built to Last didn't even exist. They started with a totally clean slate, just followed the data wherever it led, and only tried to connect the dots at the very, very end.
And you can really see the difference in the core questions they were asking. Built to Last was all about the icons, the companies that were great for a century or more. But Good to Great looked at a totally different beast. The average, kind of boring, unremarkable company that somehow, against all odds, made this incredible leap to elite performance, and then, this is key, kept it going.
So once they finished that second study, that's when the big aha moment hit. The team looked at their findings and realized that the concepts from Good to Great, disciplined people, disciplined thought, disciplined action, these weren't just for turnarounds. These were the exact same things the Built to Last companies did way back in their early, formative years. It's the slow, steady build-up that has to happen before any big breakthrough.
This quote from Sam Walton, it just nails the idea perfectly. We look at a giant like Walmart and think it was this overnight success. But Walton, he knew the truth. He knew that overnight feeling was really the result of 2 decades of quiet, relentless, day in, day out pushing.
And check this out. This chart says it all. For 25 years, Walmart went from 1 single store to just 38 stores. 25 years. That is the slow, grinding build-up. But then, that flywheel starts to get momentum and boom. In the next 30 years, it explodes to over 3,000 locations. That's the breakthrough. So how do you even start that long buildup? Well, it all begins with a core concept from Good to Great. First who, then what. And the founders of Hewlett-Packard are the poster children for this. They didn't start with some brilliant idea for a product. They started with each other. They just knew they wanted to build a fantastic company with people they respected. The founding minutes of their company literally say the question of what to manufacture was postponed. Can you imagine that? And this is just incredible. This humility is the absolute hallmark of what Collins calls a level 5 leader. Someone who has this crazy blend of deep personal humility and just ferocious professional will. It's another key ingredient from Good to Great. Years after building one of the world's most iconic companies, Bill Hewlett was crediting their success to just being lucky. And David Packard's response? A total understatement. Zero ego, just a relentless focus on building something great. Okay, so let's say you've done it. You've used the Good to Great principles, you've built your engine, you have a breakthrough, and you have a great company. Awesome. But how do you make it an enduring great company? How do you make it last? Well, this is where the ideas from Built to Last come into play. It turns out you need an extra dimension, something that goes way beyond just making money. And that extra dimension is a core ideology. You can think of it like the company's soul. It's made of 2 parts, your core values, what you truly stand for, and your core purpose, your fundamental reason for existing. For a company that lasts, profit is like oxygen. You absolutely need it to live, but it's not the point of life. Merck is such a powerful example of this. They developed a cure for river blindness, a terrible disease that affected millions of the world's poorest people. Now, they knew those patients could never afford to pay for it. So what did Merck do? They gave the drug away for free, forever. Just like the founder's son said, they believed if they focused on the patient, the profits would follow. And you know what? They did. Merck became a phenomenally successful company. So here's the magic trick, the balancing act that all enduring great companies pull off. They preserve their core ideology that never changes, but they stimulate progress by changing pretty much everything else. Think about Disney. Their core values of creative imagination and bringing happiness to millions, totally fixed. But their strategies? They've changed like crazy, from black and white cartoons in the 1920s to theme parks and streaming services today. And that brings us to maybe the most famous idea from Built to Last, the bag, the big, hairy, audacious goal. But there's a problem, a huge trap really. What's the difference between a good bag and a really, really bad one? Well, the answer, as it turns out, is hiding back in the Good to Great framework. You see, a bad BHAG is just bravado. It's an ego trip. It's some random giant goal that gets pulled out of thin air, and honestly, it can totally demotivate your team because it feels impossible. But a good BHAG, that's not random at all. It comes from a place of deep understanding, and it gets everyone fired up because it feels audacious, yet totally achievable. And this is the secret sauce. A good BHAG comes from what Collins calls the hedgehog concept.
It's this simple, crystal clear idea that flows from really understanding the intersection of these three circles. It's not a guess, it's a deep insight into what you and only you are uniquely positioned to do.
Just look at Boeing back in the 1950s. They were a military bomber company, no commercial planes. But they understood their three circles. They were passionate about building awesome jets, they knew their military experience could make them the absolute best in the world at commercial jets, and they saw how it would totally transform their business. So they bet the farm, a quarter of their entire net worth, on building the 707. That, my friends, was a good bag.
So here it is, all laid out, the unified theory. You start with the good to great ideas to build your flywheel, to get that momentum going from build-up to breakthrough. That gets you to sustained great results. Then you apply the build to last concepts, like having a core ideology and a good bag, to turn those results into a company that endures for generations.
Okay, this all sounds fantastic if you're a giant corporation. But why should any of us really care? I mean, why bother striving for greatness at all? This is where we move beyond corporate strategy and get into something deeper. The human search for meaning in the work we do.
Let me tell you this story about a high school cross-country team. They went from being pretty good to becoming state champions by figuring out their hedgehog concept. It was simple. We run best at the end. So they stopped wasting energy on parties and rah-rah team speeches, and they focused only on things that reinforced that one simple idea. They became champions not by working harder, but by having this beautiful, simple clarity on what mattered most.
And that story reveals a pretty profound truth, something a little counterintuitive. It is no harder to build something great than it is to build something good. In fact, think about it. Trying to keep a mediocre thing going, with all the confusion and wasted energy and internal politics, that's often way more draining and exhausting than the focused, powerful work of building something excellent.
And at the end of the day, the drive for greatness isn't really about ambition for its own sake. It's about finding work that has real meaning for you. The coach of that team didn't do it for a trophy. She did it because she deeply cared about the work and what it did for those kids. When you feel that way about something, the question, why be great, doesn't even make sense. Of course you're going to try to make it great.
So we end with this thought. The framework from good to great to built to last isn't just a roadmap for corporations. It's a way of thinking about our own work, our own lives. The real question isn't why greatness. The real question is, what work makes you feel so passionate, so engaged that you feel absolutely compelled to make it great?
So we all want to know, right? What's this secret sauce that takes a company from just good to truly great? Well, you might be surprised to hear that the real secret isn't just in the answer itself. It's actually in the incredible, super rigorous investigation that found it. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the blueprint behind good to great.
I mean, that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? Leaders have been obsessed with this for decades. But finding a real, scientific answer, one that you can actually count on, that isn't just about getting lucky or having some larger-than-life CEO, yeah, that's incredibly tough.
So to find that answer, this one research team went all in. We're talking a massive investigation, digging through decades of data from the Fortune 500, America's biggest corporations, all to hunt for a very specific, repeatable pattern.
And you know what they found? After 5 years of work, sifting through absolute mountains of data, they found that blueprint for greatness in just 11 companies. Out of all those thousands, only 11 made that distinct leap and, crucially, kept it going for more than 15 years.
Okay, so let's really dive into this, because this is the story of how they found them. And honestly, understanding the how is just as important as the what. This is what separates real, timeless principles from just another fleeting business fad.
So the team knew they couldn't just go out and pick companies they thought were cool. No way. They needed a totally unbiased, super methodical way to find organizations that didn't just have a good year or two, but made a clear, measurable leap to greatness and actually stay there.
And what they came up with was this funnel. Just picture it, a series of filters that get tougher and tougher at each stage. Each one was designed to systematically weed out thousands of companies until only the absolute purest examples of this good to great jump were left.
And what's wild about this process is just how brutal it was. I mean, they started with 30 years worth of Fortune 500 companies. The first cut, boom, less than 10% are left. By the third cut, they're down to about 1%. This whole thing was designed to find the true, absolute outliers, not just another successful business.
So here's the key thing to get. They weren't just looking for good companies. Tons of famous, super successful corporations like Intel got cut right away because, well, they were always great. And others, like Chrysler, they got cut because they were classic turnaround stories, going from terrible to just average. The criteria were just laser-focused.
And get this, just look at some of the companies that got cut in the third round. We're talking giants, Boeing, Campbell Soup, Coca-Cola, even McDonald's, all of them gone. Why? Because they didn't show that exact pattern of a sustained leap from a solid, good performance to something truly consistently exceptional.
Okay, but finding those 11 companies, that was really only half the battle. See, to understand why they became great, the researchers needed something to compare them against. And this is where the study goes from just good to absolutely brilliant.
This is basically the secret to any good science. Think about a medical trial, right? To know if a new drug actually works, you can't just give it to everyone. You need a control group, a group that gets a placebo, so you can isolate the one thing, the drug, that's actually making a difference.
So that's exactly what they did. The goal was to find a near-identical twin for each of the 11 great companies. I'm talking a company that had all the same opportunities, was in the same business, had similar resources, a company that could have made that leap to greatness, but for some reason just didn't.
And they didn't just pick any old competitor. Oh no, they used 6 incredibly strict criteria to find the perfect match. And here's the crazy part. In some cases, the comparison company, the one that didn't become great, was actually stronger at the starting line. It's like they were intentionally stacking the deck against their own theory, which just makes what they found in the end that much more powerful.
This is a perfect example of how powerful this method is. Take the tale of 2 drugstores. In 1975, Walgreens and Eckerd looked pretty similar. Eckerd was a strong company totally poised for success. But by comparing it directly to Walgreens, the researchers could finally ask that killer question. Okay, what did Walgreens do that Eckerd didn't? And that is how they started to isolate the principles that really, truly mattered.
Okay, so when you make a claim this big, you know the skeptics are going to come out. A study this bold was bound to get some tough questions, but the research team was ready for it. They actually anticipated the biggest critiques and addressed them head-on, which honestly is what makes their conclusions so convincing.
All right, let's hit the big one first. Can you really trust a study of only 11 companies? And you know what? That's a totally fair question. After all that work, to end up with just 11, it does feel kind of small, right?
But here's the thing. They ran the numbers, hard. An independent mathematician looked at the data and confirmed that the patterns they found were so incredibly strong and so consistent across all 11 companies and so clearly missing from the comparison companies that the probability of it all happening by random chance was, well, let's just say it was less than 1 in 17 million. That's not a fluke.
Okay, next question. What happens when great companies stop being great? I mean, no company stays on top forever. So how does the theory handle the inevitable stumbles that even the best companies eventually face?
And the answer is pretty clear. The research showed that when a company, take Gillette for example, which had an absolutely incredible 18-year run, when it stops applying these core principles, it will eventually slide backward. So the findings aren't some magic guarantee of permanent success. Think of it more like a blueprint for a disciplined system that you have to keep working on day in and day out. All right, now for a really tough one. How can a tobacco company like Philip Morris be considered great? This, as you can imagine, was a source of some pretty heated debate, even inside the research team itself. And it's a really important ethical question we have to face.
The researchers were very, very clear on this point. This was a study of financial performance, period. It was not a moral judgment, and from that perspective, the data was just undeniable. Philip Morris didn't just beat the market, it absolutely crushed its direct competitor, R.J. Reynolds. What they found was that the strength of conviction a company has in its values, whatever those values happen to be, was directly correlated with performance.
So, after all this exhaustive, painstaking work, what's the big takeaway? Why have we spent all this time focusing on the method and not just jumping straight to the answers? Why does it matter so much? It matters because that extreme rigor is what gives the findings all their power. By using a disciplined, scientific method with control groups and everything, the study moved way beyond just inspiring anecdotes or cherry-picked success stories. It was able to identify timeless, repeatable principles that were there in the great companies and, just as importantly, absent in the good ones. That method is the entire foundation of its credibility.
And really, that's the ultimate lesson here. This whole investigation, it wasn't just about finding 11 great companies. It was about creating a blueprint, a mirror really, so that any organization can look at itself and get absolutely clear on what the true drivers of its own success are. It's a call to action, really. Be disciplined, be honest, and take the time to truly understand what makes you great in the first place.